Hi watercolor students. I wanted to go over the measurements of our first project. We're going to be setting up the palette together. It's a pretty complex project. Once everybody has their blank empty palette and the 4 tubes of required paint, and extra yellow always, we're going to be setting up the palette. It's about mixing the primaries with no water, which is the only time we do that. And I'm also going to demonstrate how to actually fill in properly the wheel. And we're going to do some scales as well. But just for now, I wanted to show you real quick the measurements and also the technique. You may be watching this video in different order because I haven't done the setup yet for the actual palette. Palette and the paper are the most expensive items in watercolor. The paint itself is not that bad, and the brushes you can get away with pretty reasonable ones for now. Down the line you'll want to start collecting really nice ones. You'll have angled ones, flat ones, round ones, big ones, small ones. I tried to get a variety in there. We don't use the round very much. That's more for lines. So in this project we're going to be using flat brushes only, and we're going to create a very soft pale wheel. The goal being exact same saturation in every circle. This project usually has bad results, and don't worry about that. It's the first one. It's the one we look back on at the end of the semester and laugh about, because it's really hard to manipulate watercolor because you don't know what the brush does, how much water it holds, how to avoid puddles, how to avoid streaks, whether it should be drier, wetter, you know. And mostly the mistake people make is they don't ever get the light enough saturation. Watercolor is a delicate medium. It's meant to be transparent, like you're looking through a pale piece of glass onto the paper. That's the first mistake new painters make. The second one, and everyone makes this, even great painters, terrible mistake, is not leaving the white of the paper strategically. In every painting, the general goal is to leave at least a quarter to a third of the paper white. Once you lose the paper, you lose it all, really, and then you have an overworked painting. That's why you see so many different types of paper, different textures, different types of white that really show through. Anyway, we'll get to all that. I just wanted to let you know these measurements for half of your board. I'll also attach, because we use the same wheel from my color theory class, I'll include that video in your module too, so you can see the setup. But basically the weird part is over here the measurement is not in the middle, and also over here. So once you divide a 10 by 15 area and split it half and half, these are different. These are 3/4 inch to put the dot and 4.5 to put the dot. But I don't need to go into that because, you know, it's already there in the other video. On the other half of this, we're going to be doing some scales over here. We're going to practice some scales, even wash scales as well as wet and wet ones. It's very tricky, and we're going to do this several times. Here it's divided into 5 and 5 because that's the other half of the paper. But in our case, we're going to divide even further. We're going to do 2.5 all the way through, 2.5. And if you want, you can go ahead and set that up. 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, and then these split in half, 7.5, 7.5. This is just going to be where we practice all of our scales and using the colors from the wheel. So when you label this, yellow's the top, blue and red are just below the horizon line here, and they can be in either order. And we're going to do the secondaries as well as the tertiaries. So there's 12 altogether, and then we're going to do a little neutral in the middle. I wanted to show you just quickly how to fill in something with an even wash and how fast it has to be. So I'm going to put a circle just on the scratch paper. Let's say you're filling yellow-green. And I'm picking yellow-green because yellow-green and yellow-orange are the most difficult colors to mix. And every time you mix anything with yellow, we start with yellow. So when we set up the palette, we put all the paint in the first day of class and then we never basically add paint again. It's pretty rare. We make generous pools of each color. From yellow to red, we make yellow-orange, we make all the tertiaries. And again, no colors except the 3 I had you order. Don't even think of putting different blues or greens or anything like that, like weird magentas, weird stuff like that. We don't want that in here. We want just the color because we want to learn how to mix real earthy. So you're going to have your yellow-green in here. And the thing that people don't realize is you put a lot of water in here first before you do anything. You don't use the paint. You fill this whole thing with water. This is just stained red, it's not. And even when there's leftover paint here, you can reuse it. You can, for years, anything dried out, reuse. See how much wet paint wet water I'm putting in here? Because I don't want my circle to be oversaturated. So I'm going to take my brush, dip it in here barely. Barely. It's a good yellow-green. Everybody thinks it's too yellow, but it's not. We're going to create that when we mix it with the actual paint. So I don't want it too wet, so I'm kind of spinning it, but I don't want it too dry either. So what we always do, always have a sketch paper on the side. So I can test the saturation. It's too dark. Believe it or not, that's too dark. So I have to add more water to my area here, but see I'm using the entire mixing area. You don't ever want to have a tiny circle because then the brush isn't properly saturated. That is way too dark. And now I'm going to test it again. That's alright. I'll put a little more water. Your goal is always lighter than you think. Okay, I think I'm ready. So that's the process before you even paint it in. And as you go to put your yellow and your orange around it on the wheel, it has to be the exact same saturation. So you always want a generous place to test on the side anytime, because it's a one-hit thing. Watercolor is just one hit, that's it. It's not like painting where you can go all over it, acrylic. So another thing is to use a brush that fits the area. You can spin it. If it gets puddly, you can move the puddle, but you do not want to go back more than that. If it's not perfect, leave it. If you try to go back and fix it, it's a mess. So that's my yellow-green. Believe it or not, it looks like yellow, but you won't know that it's not yellow until you put yellow. Now again, I have to make sure that this is not more saturated than that, so I got to test it. That's not bad. You can see a slight difference in pigment that you'll be able to see more in the actual wheel. But again, you want to lightly go over it, and that's what we're going to do all the way around. And I'll do more demo on that soon.